Hello, and welcome to the Old Soul Archaeology Podcast. My name is Michelle Janae. Thank you for tuning in and listening. Are you ready to dig deep? Hello, and welcome to Point of Departure. My name is Michelle Janae with Old Soul Archaeology. Today, our point of departure is the power of the personal oracle. You are the oracle. Let me say that again. You are the oracle. What do I mean by that? You have questions. Big questions, little questions, life questions, love questions, work questions, all kinds of questions. Ultimately, you want to live with more abundance, more joy. You want to live life with clarity, openness, and confidence. Am I right? With regard to all of these questions, if you're in the majority, you've looked almost exclusively outside of yourself for answers. Priests and preachers, kings and presidents, parents and teachers, bosses and advisors, and possibly fortune tellers and psychics. Now, if you've consulted the last two of these, you're probably closer than the rest of the population to realizing that you are the oracle. But if you were like me, those last two were anathema and were to be feared as sinful and of the devil. Fortunately, my spiritual walk has opened up so many more possibilities and has allowed the fears of 4 decades to begin to fade. My spiritual walk has opened me up to the possibility, the probability that everyone has the gift of inner wisdom, that everyone has access to this inner wisdom through intuition and psychic gifts. But before I get into how you are the oracle, let's start at the beginning by defining oracle. So what is an oracle? In etymological terms, meaning the root of the word oracle, an oracle is the message, a place of reception, the manner of reception, and the receiver. The message, of course, is generally a message from the divine or message from a god. The place of reception is the place where the oracles are given. The most famous of these was Delphi, where the priestess received the oracle on behalf of the people. The manner of reception, which can be dreams, intuitions, signs, and symbols, and the receiver, again, the agency or medium of a god. You are the oracle in the sense that your body, both spiritual and physical body, is the place of reception. Your mind, the receiver, and because the message comes from within, you are the message as well, or at least the owner of it. You also happen to be the interpreter of any of the manners of transmission and reception that you allow to come through you. You are a channel. You could think of it this way. You are the radio signal and the radio station. And in the same way, someone who speaks Morse code has to receive the transmission and interpret it for others. You are also the receiver and translator. As for the message, it is generally personal, but can also contain universal wisdom as well. Interestingly, oracle has the same root as orare, which means to plead, to pray to, or to beseech. So in addition to all of the above, you are also the beseecher or the one who questions. You are the one who comes with the request. So how crazy wonderful is it that you are a complete oracular system in and of yourself? You might think that the only thing missing is the messenger, the God that you are consulting. Now, whether you believe that the divine answer you receive comes from within you, as part of the divine, your higher self, or from without, an external spirit speaking through you, is of little difference. The result is the same. And maybe, just maybe, it's not either or, but both and. Both internal and external at the same time. An oracle was a gateway to knowing the will of the gods, a cosmic information superhighway for understanding what lay ahead. So I also want to compare fortune-telling with oracular work because it's often used interchangeably or confused. Fortune telling is generally predictive. This will happen to you. This is going to happen to you. This won't happen to you, etc. Oracular work is not predictive but prescriptive in the sense that it makes suggestions to you on things that you can do to move forward in your life. Just like a doctor might say you can take this medicine to try and alleviate some symptoms. The trouble with predictive work, like fortune telling, is that while it can work, and it does work sometimes, it's not compellingly helpful. Predictive work identifies patterns and then foretells a future based on the continuation of set patterns. Most of us can do this to some degree just by identifying patterns. We can tell if a company is going to go out of business, or they call it forecasting. So we do this with weather all the time. But life has far too many variables to allow any final say in the future. We can truly only deal in the now. From this now, and this one, and this one. We can make choices that will determine whether we travel the left road or the right one, go high or go low, move forward or double back. Let's say that you just happen to change a small part of your routine, and like a plane slightly off course, you don't end up with the foretold future, for better or for worse. This is what happens typically when you go to a fortune teller. And it doesn't take much, really, to veer from a pattern and get off course. So sometimes it can be helpful, and sometimes it can't. And no fortune teller is able to predict 100% of the time because we do have free will. So what we really need, if we're looking for growth, is prescriptive oracular work. The cool thing about prescriptive work is that you keep your free will. You decide what you want or don't want to do. So how do we do this? Well, we shift from looking without to looking within. As I mentioned before, our social conditioning has us looking for answers externally. All of the aforementioned consultants and advisors and self-help books and seminars and other figures of authority. So even if we do venture into the world of fortune tellers and psychics, which is a little bit closer to our oracular work, we are still following an external source of information and advice. My first experience with psychic information, other than shamanic journey work, because remember, I was brought up to think that it was evil and that it was either a farce, a parlor trick, completely unreliable, or it was evil, or both. So again, my first experience with psychic information, other than shamanic journey work that I've done for some years now, wasn't actually with a psychic per se. I didn't go out and hire a psychic. And I'd still be very careful if I did, not to say that I wouldn't. But I would go off of referrals from people that I know and trust, because there are some out there that are straight up charlatans. So anyways, I actually hired someone to clear some energy for me, and this was based off of a prominent website that I found reading a particular book on the subject, and the person that I hired was trained by the author of this book. So she may have had services in the area of psychic or fortune-telling work. I don't think she had a website herself. But that's not what I knew her to do or hired her for. Again, she was hired to do an energy clearing for me. Now, I was already a Reiki 2 practitioner. I'm familiar with energy, how it healed, how it could hurt, how it could get stuck. So I thought, well, maybe to move forward with some of the challenges I was having in my life, I would do some energy clearing. Well, little did I know that she'd pull up psychic information on me, which looking back makes perfect sense. In fact, Reiki is well known to open up psychic and intuitive channels because everything is energy. So once you're more in tune with energy and aligned with it, you will pick up more information if you're practicing and paying attention. So if she could see this stuck energy to enable it to move, it would make sense that she could probably see why I was getting stuck, and therein was the psychic information. Now, as a result of that energy clearing and some prescriptive information from her, again, prescriptive, not predictive, my eyes were opened just a little bit more as to how this is all connected. So just over 6 months ago, I had been doing some Akashic Records work with imagery in particular, and I started painting some of my own images to work with in an oracular fashion. Abstract and semi-figurative, energetic and evocative, I found these images were just what I needed to bypass my logical, rational mind to enter into what I call heart space, to be able to receive oracular wisdom for myself. I also found that as I worked with the images, the messages would change, often based on mood or circumstance. Now, it's true that the information you need for your life today isn't quite the information you might need 6 months from now, and that's why this is important. Now, in working with the images, sometimes they would shapeshift. I'd see one thing or another, kind of like looking at clouds. And someone might see an alligator and someone else might see a puppy dog, and they're both completely valid interpretations of this cloud. So sometimes, as I'm working with the images, they would shapeshift and appearing to be something entirely different than they were before, also resulting in different messages. But always the messages were helpful and prescriptive, as I mentioned before. So I began to compare this method that I've called Old Soul Oracle to other oracle cards I have. Other decks, if you're familiar with oracle cards, generally come with booklets or sometimes full-length books with written interpretations for each card. Many of them are incredibly beautiful and indeed helpful. But as I mentioned in episode 3 of my podcast, Point of Departure, The Emergent Voice, we can fail to integrate some of the messages into our lives. Instead, reading them and nodding knowingly, but then moving on with our day and simply letting them sit on top of our psyche like oil on water. And still, we aren't looking within. I say this emphatically, still, we aren't looking within. We are missing out on an incredible source of wisdom. Huge, like Julia Roberts in Pretty Woman, huge, huge. Our most invaluable source of wisdom is from within. It's the acres of diamonds or gold mine right in our backyard. It's that secret that is where our connection to the divine is. Some religious traditions would have us believe that we need an intermediary, and it just isn't so. Not that they aren't helpful sometimes, but as a rule, we do not need an intermediary between ourselves and the divine. Now, it's true that we want to know who we are. That's one of our big questions. Who am I? What am I here for? So I ask you, how can anyone else know who we are, or who you are, or who I am? How can anyone else who hasn't walked in your shoes, seen from your eyes, heard from your ears, felt from your heart, how can they know who you are? How can you, now realizing that, continue to ask all of these major, all-important life questions of other people? How can you, now realizing that, continue to ask all of these major, all-important life questions of other people? We think we don't know the answers because we've been convinced that we aren't worthy of our very own wisdom. Unfortunately, social conditioning barely makes us worthy of other people's information or wisdom. And worse, we're conditioned to think that we don't have any wisdom at all to offer ourselves, that we have no connection to our higher self, much less the divine. And then there's a further dilemma that here we are, not trusting ourselves while trying to offer something to others. It's no wonder we feel disconnected from ourselves and unconfident and even incompetent as we offer advice to others. And we think that our masks do not betray us, but inevitably we betray ourselves. The answer is inside, and the way inside is through the oracle. Inner wisdom is the goal that leads to a more fulfilling life. There are a few paths. The Old Soul Oracle or oracle work is not the only one, although I would consider many of these paths to be oracle work. And the ones that I'm most familiar with and work with are shamanic journeying, Akashic records, and of course my old soul oracle system. But there's also dream work, which I've done a little bit of as well. Dream work is very, very oracular. In a book I was reading by Dovbear Pinson called Visualization and Imagery, Pinson says that the reason we can't answer the big questions like, why am I here? What is my true purpose and mission in this world? Is that we are suffering a crisis of imagination. This hit me like a ton of bricks because I had never really put it into words, but I knew and I know in the depths of my being that much of our trouble in this world, and collectively and personally, is a lack of imagination. We don't really know how to capitalize on it. The only way we can access our inner wisdom is through the imagination. We already use the imagination, so we can't say that it's completely obsolete. And much of it is used positively in things like planning and prayer. You have to use your imagination even to pray. But also negatively, very much so in worry and negative assumptions about people and situations. We generally don't acknowledge that these areas are uses of imagination because somewhere along the way they've convinced us that the imagination is child's play and make-believe. Did you know that the word fable has been reduced to mean a lie, but it used to mean a story with hidden wisdom? Isn't that crazy? I'm writing a book about how we've lost the power of certain words, and I don't know when that'll be out because it's piece by piece, word by word, but it's actually amazingly fun. So we're convinced that we can write fiction books with our imagination, but we can't use it to guide our lives. And here I say wrong. This is the crisis of imagination. The fact that we aren't empowered to harness it, to harness the imagination in order to live with that joy, clarity, openness, and confidence that I mentioned at the beginning of the episode. Now, it may be a myth that Einstein said we only use 10% of our brains, but if he had said it, he would probably be referring to the fact that we don't effectively use the part of our brain responsible for the imagination. One thing he did say was, imagination is more important than knowledge, for knowledge is limited, whereas imagination embraces the entire world, stimulating progress, giving birth to evolution. Our personal evolution into the lives we dream of is dependent on our willingness to trust ourselves, to learn to trust our imaginations and then use them effectively. I like to say that the imagination is a psychic looking glass. While it may seem that I might be against psychics and fortune tellers or other oracle cards, that isn't the case. What is called for is balance. The best teachers are those who show you where to look but don't tell you what to see. They don't expect you to stay focused on their finger pointing at the moon. They're hoping you'll transfer your gaze to the moon. The moon is what we're after, metaphorically speaking. Hopefully, these teachers will offer wisdom but encourage you to contemplate the value of it for yourself. The best people to get external advice from aren't those who want to be your guru, but are those who inevitably and joyfully point you back to yourself. You are the moon. The last two pieces I want to focus on in this episode is the practice of inquiry and the immense value of journaling as I've developed for Old Soul Oracle. Inquiry is all about questions. For me, inquiry is the curious beginning of a conversation, like meeting someone new and saying, "Hi, where are you from? What do you do? Tell me a little bit about yourself." Asking good questions is hard, however, because it requires that you see past the easy answers and focus instead on the difficult, the tricky, the mysterious, the awkward, and sometimes the painful. Now, this is the real power of inquiry work with Old Soul Oracle cards, because at least what I've found, and when I've done readings with people, I've found that the answers are from a heart place, from a higher self, from a place of non-judgment. They are, again, prescriptive and helpful, wanting for us our greatest and highest good. That is what the divine in us or outside of us wants for us, is our greatest and highest good. So you don't get the kinds of answers that you might hear if you're thinking with the voice that usually runs around in your head full of criticisms and doubt. Carolyn Meese said, "Questions are the way we're going to access and build bridges between the horizontal world and the vertical realm of your inner nature." I love the symbology of that, horizontal world and the vertical realm. If you think about it, it forms a cross, which in many traditions, Christian and otherwise, really points to our connection with the divine. When I work with my Old Soul Oracle cards, I draw a random card from the deck and I begin a dialogue with it that is based on inquiry. After entering into a meditative state, I use my imagination to envision this conversation between myself and whatever image has appeared to me, like an imaginary friend. The inquiry begins when I ask the card or image, "Who are you?" or "What do you represent for me?" I intuit a response and write down what I hear in my mind. I continue by asking, "What message do you have for me?" and again, write it down. I use a suggested line of questioning, but if I feel the need to ask a clarifying question or otherwise veer from a set of 5 main questions I've developed, I do so. Sometimes the response I hear is a question for me to answer, and so I continue to answer for myself. And it's really interesting how being in this different state of mind allows me to find this deeper answer in myself. Now, as I mentioned before, the process is prescriptive. So if I ask what is the next step I should take for my business, for example, I have the choice to follow any suggestions I perceive in the response or not. The best thing about this is that I simply have to act on the suggestion or not. I don't have to worry about details or conditions. I can tell you that I've made some amazing advancements and implementations that I might otherwise wouldn't have made by following this method. Jonas Salk observed that what people think of as the moment of discovery is really the discovery of the question. So I'll just give you a couple of examples here on drawing questions from questions, how one question might lead to another that's outside of the realm of the 5 major questions, which are pretty straightforward. So I draw a card that I interpret to be a dancing shaman. And so I ask, what does this picture say to me? Again, it's just another way of saying, who are you, or what do you represent? And the oracle responds, or the card, the message that I intuit, I am dancing shaman, carrying a stick or wand of magical power. The power is in the dancing to one's own rhythm, which infuses the wand. So I write all of this down, and then I think, okay, well, if the power is in the dancing, maybe I should inquire more on that. And so I ask, how can I dance more? And the oracle responds, on your non-exercise days, I usually do kettlebell, do an intuitive dance from anywhere from 5 to 20 minutes. It will be good for body, heart, mind, and soul. So I've done that a few times. I don't always follow it. Again, the choice is to follow it or not. But what I found with intuitive dance is that it's its own therapy, if you will. I do it in a room alone, all by myself, sometimes with headphones, sometimes not. But it's just about feeling your body. It's not about prescribed movements. It's not about following any set of choreographed steps. You just kind of flow with the music. It's very healing. So I'll give you another example. I draw a card and I ask, who are you? And the card says, I am the phoenix. And I ask, well, what do I need to know about this picture? And the response is, it is a phoenix rising in the midst of clouds. In the mist, we could say. Did you catch that play on words? It said, in the midst, and then corrected it to in the mist, or not really corrected it, but kind of added on. So I thought that was kind of interesting, that coming through. And so I ask, do we rise above the mist of illusion or into a mist of dreams that are more real than so-called reality? And the oracle responds, they are both mists of different frequencies. Even our descent journeys, speaking of the shamanic journey, are in this mist of higher frequency because there is more love. So again, I'm kind of going with the flow, kind of rabbit trailing, if you will, or going down the rabbit hole with my questioning. And I have found that the responses that I get are amazingly helpful, and probably not something that I would have come up with in a beta state of mind or in an ego state of mind, in the logical, rational, linear. These answers aren't necessarily that. They're not necessarily the answers that would be given by external authorities per se, unless it was perhaps an oracle card or something of that nature. But again, the important part being that in this way, you are tapping into yourself, and so it becomes so much more relevant to how you apply it and live your life. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about journaling, because the journal is one way to integrate the information, and as I already mentioned, as I'm getting these answers, I am scribing them or writing them down. But what I've found over time, and the ability to go back over my journal and read some of these responses, I'm telling you, it's better than any book I could check out at the library or buy at the bookstore. It's like a fascinating mystical memoir of my life, and it is so, so important to see this. So I refer to my journal as a spiral notebook, not because of the rings that bind the page. Consistent in my journaling, it shows me the spiral life. I can see how my questions and responses change over time. I notice synchronicities and patterns. I see how my images and interpretations also change over time, something that would never happen with someone else's static interpretation for a card. Again, with the other oracle card, if you draw this card, this is the interpretation every single time. And that's not to say, again, that it wouldn't help. It very possibly might help, but the challenge is in integrating it and not, again, letting it lie on top of your psyche like oil on water. So while they're helpful and fun, it is still very important to go within for your own inner wisdom. And there are ways to use other people's oracle cards for this purpose, but you have to put the book down. You have to be careful about using their interpretations. So in reviewing past entries in my journal, I can find renewed energy, confirmation of the effectiveness of the process, as well as a sense of foresight. Now I can be imaginatively predictive for myself. So now in a way, I can actually become my own fortune teller and be, like I said, predictive, as I see patterns and results that are wholly my own. I don't need a fortune teller to predict my future. So it's important to note that my spiral notebook isn't a dear diary where I vent my feelings and record the events of my life, although it does contain some of that indirectly. My spiral notebook journal is where I explore personal meaning and discovery of self through varying degrees of inquiry. It is an active quest instead of a static record. Now, it seems that every self-help book recommends a journal, and I have to admit, I don't always do it. A lot of times I'm reading through a book and I'm skimming and I'm reading through, and I don't. That's been one of my problems personally, is looking to external authority, was actually putting their practices into play in my own life. And maybe it was because maybe it didn't resonate, or maybe I was just looking for the easy answer and the information I wanted, but I didn't journal it. Had I decided to put their practices into play and actually journal some of the exercises, I have no doubt that they would have affected my life, and most likely in very positive ways. I will say if you read a book and it's something that really interests you and you have the hope, even belief in the possibility that it could change your life, that you would journal the exercises like it suggests. It is so powerful. So yes, if you are undergoing any specific self-help method, even from an external authority, Old Soul Oracle or otherwise, a journal is immensely valuable. Our introspection must include retrospection to assess our growth, which is the whole point of self-help. And being able to read back through our journal is where retrospection is the most powerful. This is an interesting quote from John Holland, an actual well-known psychic, in his book, Power of the Soul. He says, "When I write in my journal, it's as though I somehow step off the busy merry-go-round for a moment. The world stops for a few seconds as I pause for a breath. It's my time to reflect as I attempt to make sense of and interpret my feelings and appreciate what my soul or life is trying to show me. By recording your thoughts, you're consciously getting them out of your head and onto paper. The sheer action of writing them down provides a clearer view of what's happening within you. You may start noticing a pattern of events and situations in your life, and as they become more evident, you'll see with increased clarity just what you can do to enhance or stop them." Sandra Ann Taylor, in her book, The Akashic Records Made Easy, also suggests journaling, and she says, "The simple process of writing about your experiences is an important piece of gaining clarity about your records." And I would just add that it's an important part of gaining clarity about anything that you are processing that you write down. Nikki Scully, in Alchemical Healing, states that alchemy is a process that spirals from cycle to cycle, ever upward and forward, repeating itself as required to transform and change us through the experiences of our body, soul, psyche, and spirit. So to her point about the alchemy, which is changing lead into gold, except that the spiritual alchemist is looking for that life change. We're not looking to actually take lead from somewhere in the earth and somehow transform it into gold to make ourselves rich. We're looking for that soul transformation. So she talks about it as a process that spirals from cycle to cycle, upward and forward, repeating itself as required to transform and change us through the experiences of our body, soul, psyche, and spirit. This is why I call my journal the Spiral Notebook. I have a mind to develop a course called the Spiral Notebook, where I would take people on a journaling journey. It's not easy, I'll tell you that. It takes dedication. Now, I've probably journaled for over 100 days at a time, but there are some days when I don't, and that's okay. It's okay to miss a couple days or to journal every other day, but it's really important to have a regular practice. Why is it important to have a regular practice? Well, in the sense of you being an oracle, for you to be able to see the results, that practice is important. For any gift to develop within us, whether it be psychic or otherwise, even material gifts like learning to play the guitar, the practice is where we find our growth. It's not in reading the book and finishing a chapter and then finishing the book and passing a test. It's in application and it's in practice. And so this idea of a spiral notebook being this record of a process that spirals from cycle to cycle, upward and forward, repeating itself as required to transform and change us through the experiences of our body, soul, psyche, and spirit. Nikki Scully, I love that quote. As you can tell, I've said it 3 times. You are the oracle. You have the power to know your own mind, to know, most importantly, your own heart, to find your own answers and to be able to trust them. I do offer Old Soul Oracle readings where I am simply a facilitator and a guide, and I help you do your own interpretation of a series of cards for your own wisdom. And you can check my website, oldsoularchaeology.com, for some testimonials on that process. It's incredibly powerful. I also sell my Old Soul Oracle cards with a set of instructions and an accompanying ebook. The book is not in print format. It does not come printed on paper. It is an ebook that short, easy read, lays out the process of using the cards. But I would say that booking an Old Soul Oracle session with me is probably the most direct and most powerful way to experience it, but absolutely not necessary. In fact, with many of my clients, I encourage them, they can do repeat sessions with me, but really, like that teacher that doesn't want you looking at their finger pointing to the moon, they want you looking at the moon. I, too, want you looking to yourself for the roots of your wisdom. And may I just be a channel for you. I hope that wasn't too much information at once. If this was of any interest to you, I'd encourage you to get a notebook and re-listen to this podcast. Share it with someone who's having self-doubts about their own wisdom, their own power to make decisions in their life. And as always, thank you for tuning in. My name is Michelle Janae with Old Soul Archaeology, and this has been Point of Departure.